What's going on, podcast listeners? Neel here for another episode of the Freedom Formula podcast. This is a little bit of a unique one because it's actually a solo episode. And I think this topic is pretty fascinating because it's around mindset constraints and common issues I see with people who apply to be and made this franchise and why they won't get into entrepreneurship. Now, that's a mouthful, but let me explain myself. So I've run my local business, Made This Cleaning, since 2013. So it's been 12 years now, and I started franchising it around 2020. And since then, I've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of people to join me this franchise. And we're insanely picky. I think I've had 4,000 people apply. We have about 32 locations at the moment, and hopefully more trickling in through as well. But extremely picky with who gets in because I look for certain things when it comes to how they think about entrepreneurship and what they're looking for. And the crazy part is I started noticing trends with, how people think. And honestly, like within the first call, I could tell if someone's actually going to be getting into entrepreneurship or not. And I'll tell you exactly how to know this. And some things I think everyone should know when they want to get entrepreneurship, when they want to get into business ownership, just things that oftentimes I've noticed in terms of mindset. And I want to share that with you. So the first concept I want to talk about is called the 1,000-day principle. Now, I've talked about this before on the podcast. I was talking with my buddy Dan, who is the host of the Tropical MBA podcast, and him and I talk about this all the time. His theory is it takes about 1,000 days or 3 years to replace your 9-to-5 income after you get into entrepreneurship. And he's run this by a bunch of people who've gone to entrepreneurship, and that's about the amount of time. And speaking from personal experience, it took me longer than 1,000 days to replace my 9-to-5. And I'm looking at some data from our franchisees, and depending on what people's previous income was, I'd say the 1,000-day principle is pretty accurate. Now, let me go and explain in a little bit more detail. I think this is the truth a lot of 9-to-5ers don't want to hear when they want to quit their job is you're probably going to make less than your current salary for at least 3 years when you start a business. And, it's crazy because a lot of people I speak to want to replace their income entirely before they start their own business. They come to me and say, hey, Neel, I want to have a lot of time in my day. I want to start my business. And when I replace my income, then I'll quit and go full time on the business. That's not entrepreneurship. That's wanting a guaranteed promotion with extra steps. That's kind of what that is. Here's how the 1,000-day principle works in action. Year one, you're basically paying an expensive education while figuring out what the hell you're even doing, right? That's year one. It's just trial and error. Year two, you're probably still making mistakes, but now they're slightly less expensive mistakes, right? You kind of know what you're doing. You got your feet under you. You got some recurring revenue coming in. Year three, you might start approaching your actual salary. Maybe. Just kind of depends on the first 2 years. And a lot of people say, dude, Neel, like 3 years is a really freaking long time to make less than I currently am. Like, yeah, that's true. Here's why it might take so long. Number one, when you get started, new customers are expensive, right? Let's talk about cleaning companies. When you first start, you don't have any reviews. No one knows who you are. You have no old customer list. So you're buying new leads constantly. Now, over time, let's say, you're 3 years down the line, you have a book of existing business. You have old customers you're remarketing to. You have 300 Google reviews. You have referrals. Like things just become easier. You're better at the sales cycle. Things become cheaper and easier to acquire that customer later on. But at the beginning, it's very expensive to get new customers because you're brand new. The second reason is you're probably going to screw up a lot more than you think, and it costs money in the game of business, right? You might fumble through the sales script. You might misquote someone. You might not hire the right crews, things like that. You're just making a lot more mistakes in year one, which set you back even more. The other part is business skills just don't develop overnight. Like a lot of this is not theory. You can't read business books and all of a sudden level up, right? A lot of it's just doing and taking action and making the mistakes. And lastly, systems generally take time to build, right? You don't start day one and say, hey, I have a perfectly systemized business. This is great. You build it as you go and grow. And some of that takes a while, right? But here's the fun part. You might be saying like, dude, 1,000 days, that's a lot of time to wait, Neel. First of all, it's not always the case, but the fun part is after 1,000 days, your income potential has now become unlimited, right? In your corporate job, maybe you get a 3% raise for cost of living every year. Big whoop, right? You're barely keeping up with inflation. But in a business, you could triple, quadruple your income in 1 year. So it's a temporary dip and then an increase in that. The reason I see this as a big mindset hurdle for a lot of people is people want the security of a 9-to-5 when getting into entrepreneurship. But these are inherently different things. They're opposite, right? A 9-to-5 is like seen as a secure path. You're getting paid from, one client, which is, your manager, and you're at the whims of what your manager thinks, but it's seen as a secure path. Entrepreneurship, by definition, is inherently more risky, right? And many times people say, well, like, I just want to feel a little bit safer, so I'm going to keep my 9 to 5 before getting into entrepreneurship. Here's the problem with that. You'll fall into the same trap I did, which it would take you more than 1,000 days to fully replace your 9 to 5 income then. I did not replace it in 1,000 days for myself because I did it 2 years as a side hustle, right? So that 1,000 days kind of gets spread out even more if you're doing it on the side. And the chances of hitting that replacement income before you leave, it's going to take way longer to do, and it might be way harder. You might lose the motivation as well. This is one of the biggest issues I see with people who want to get into franchising is they want to, avoid all risk. They want to wait till they replace their income before taking any leap of faith and bet on themselves. And many times I notice this at the beginning. And these are often the times the people who are never actually going to do anything because it's very difficult to execute that. It's almost impossible to execute that in many sustainable business models. So that's one of the big ones. The next bigger one I want to talk about, the biggest mindset hurdle when it comes to evaluating new franchisees that I see over and over and over and over is something I call POOF. It's an acronym. It's POOF, stands for procrastination, overwhelm, overthinking, and fear. These are the most common dream killers. These are things I see that happen over and over and over. This causes people not to take the leap and bet on themselves. And let me explain what POOF is and how to defeat POOF. Now, the first one is procrastination, right? And a really good analogy I heard before is, let me explain it this way. Procrastination means a lot of who are evaluating businesses, you're just not taking the right actions to set up for what you want to do, right? Maybe you're doing a lot of research, but you're procrastinating on certain things. Maybe you're supposed to be doing homework to evaluate a brand, but you don't really do it. The reason a lot of people get stuck in this phase, in my opinion, this might be controversial, is because they don't have enough desire for the end result. They don't want it enough. That's why they procrastinate. And you might be thinking, Neel, like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, I've been trying to get into entrepreneurship for a while. I'm listening to your freaking podcast. Clearly, I want this. I want $10,000 a month in passive income. Like, of course I do. I want better for my family. Here's the thing. It's a lot easier to run away from pain than it is to run towards something. What I mean by that is a lot of franchise prospects who are in a job that they're about to get laid off from, that they have a really crappy manager, that they really freaking hate, they're the ones to take action. They're the ones that don't procrastinate. I rarely ever see someone who's in a bad situation procrastinate. They're cranking through things as much as possible. The only times I see people procrastinate is when they're in a kind of okay situation. You ask them, like, how do you like your job? Like, yeah, it's pretty good. I actually kind of like it. I don't like the fact that I don't have unlimited upside, but I generally like it. Like, okay, like, how's your manager? Oh, I have a great relationship with the manager. Everything's good. Do you plan to quit? No, not really. I'll figure out when I'm comfortable, when I'm making enough money. If I hear those things, I kind of know, like, okay, I think this person's going to procrastinate to infinity. It's not going to happen. Now, you might ask me, Neel, like, okay, what's the procrastination killer, right? And that would be to have enough desire. Now, the analogy I heard is think about like a puzzle. If you think about a puzzle, what's the most important pieces of a puzzle? Now, most times people would say, like, yeah, you build the corner of the puzzle when you're putting a puzzle together, and once you get the frame, it's much easier. The corner is the most important part. That's not exactly true. The most important part is the picture on the box, right? Because you have to know what you're doing. You have to know where you're going towards in order to actually do the puzzle to begin with. That's the most important piece. The only way, if you don't have enough pain, to finally have enough desire to break procrastination is build that desire, build a vision of where you're going towards. Now, this sounds fluffy. Bear with me for a bit. Pain is easy, but you got to have a goal. You have to be crystal clear in what you want. And just saying, I want income to feel more comfort. I want $10,000 a month just because that's not good enough. You kind of have to have more of a desire and more of something you're moving towards to actually break through procrastination. And to be honest, that's harder. Right? It's much easier to move away from pain than it is towards pleasure. But if you want to break procrastination and have a really strong desire, you need to have that vision of what you want and really, really, really want that. That's a big deal. Let's talk about the next one in the POOF, right? The POOF is, the O is overwhelm, right? Think about it. Have you ever sat down to evaluate business ideas, or, you're like, all right, I got a blank Google Doc open, the cursor's blinking, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna think about stuff, and I have so much in my head. I don't know where to start. The best way to defeat overwhelm in this case is prioritization. You just have to prioritize what to do. That's the best way to defeat the feeling of overwhelm when it comes to evaluating business opportunities or even taking action in your business. Now, this sounds like super boring and obvious, but people just don't do it, right? It's still hard work, but it doesn't really have to be guesswork. That's the thing with prioritization. If you're feeling overwhelmed, that just is a signal that you just have to prioritize what's the most important action to take and eliminate the rest. That's all you got to do. And a lot of people get stuck with overwhelm, especially when it comes to evaluating new business opportunities. Maybe when it comes that they've already launched their existing business and they don't know what to do. There's too many things to do. Focus on prioritization. That doesn't just mean know that you need to prioritize, actually put it into practice. That's the best way to defeat overwhelm. The next one on the poof list, overthinking. Oof. This is a big one, right? If you overthink a lot, if you analyze business ideas to the end, if you overthink whether you should do an action or not, if you like on spreadsheets all day, you're probably an overthinker. And you know what? Congrats. That means you probably have a higher than normal IQ. You're so smart that you're actually dumb, if that makes sense. Like, you're so smart that you know everything bad that is going to happen and that prevents you from actually doing things. It's really, really hard, right? Because you overthink and you overanalyze and you analyze data all the way to the end. Now, the only way to defeat this, in my opinion, is through the strategic use of constraints. And I'll explain what constraints are in a second. But you have to use constraints to defeat overthinking. It is the only way I figured out. And guys, I'm a chronic overthinker. Like, it took me a while to get over the action of being an overthinker. I used to, come up with a business plan, make spreadsheets. I used to think 20 times before making a decision. I wanted to make the perfect decision. And the only way I found is actually implement constraints. And a lot of times this means things like calling your shot in public, having accountability, things like that. Now, let me give you an example. If you get a call and the electric company's like, hey, dude, your electricity is going to shut off in 30 minutes if you don't pay this bill. Like, goodbye, and they hang up. I promise you, you're not going to overthink. You're going to figure out how to pay the bill within 30 minutes. You'll do whatever you need. You mail them a check. You call them back. You'll just get to action, right? You've eliminated overthinking because there is a constraint of like, dude, I have 30 minutes before I have to do this thing. Another example would be like, pretend you set a goal to lose 10 pounds. You might say, cool, my goal is to lose 10 pounds. That's not a good enough constraint. A good constraint is I'm going to lose 10 pounds by August 26th on Thursday. And if I don't, I'm going to wire $10,000 or $1,000 or $100 to something I don't even want to do. Like that's an example. Put on social media, you could tell people, you call your shot publicly, and that forces that scarcity mindset, and it gets rid of the overthinking. For me, this is the only thing which has worked, honestly. Like, I am a chronic overthinker, like I said, but putting artificial constraints in, putting things out publicly, calling your shot, putting deadlines on stuff, artificial deadlines, these are the ways of getting over overthinking. Just implement artificial constraints. Cool. The last one in POOF, P-O-O-F, we went over procrastination, overwhelm, overthinking. The last one is fear. I see this a lot. I see this a lot with franchise prospects, is fear. And to be fair, like, I think fear is good. I think it's healthy. It shows that you're doing something out of your comfort zone, something that's abnormal, and you should have fear if you're doing something, right? But sometimes that fear can be paralyzing. Sometimes that fear causes people not to take actions, not to buy into something they want to do, not to start the business, not to get going in their business, not to start that new marketing initiative. There's so many things that fear causes you not to do, and you have to defeat it, right? So the only way to defeat fear, in my opinion, or the best way I should say, is just taking action. And again, this sounds fluffy, but let me explain. One of my favorite quick quotes is action creates clarity. That's it. And analogy I always use is you can't steer a parked car, right? If a car is parked and you're trying to steer it, it doesn't move. But the second you get in the car and you start moving the car, it's easier to navigate. You can see what's happening. You see more opportunities, you move it. That's what happens when you start taking action, right? And you can't really see things until you're in motion, and fear causes paralysis. Fear means you're in the car and you're not moving and you're freaking out and you're not taking any action. But once you start taking action, the car starts moving, you start to see out a little bit more, you start to understand what's happening, you start to realize, okay, this is not that scary, I understand what's happening, and it gives you more information, right? That's the best way of doing it. Now, the reason I bring this up and why it's so relevant is I see proof playing out in franchise prospects all the time, right? People will analyze the opportunity ad nauseum all the way to the end. People will procrastinate on getting things done. People will feel overwhelmed with all the things they need to actually do. People will feel fear because they actually just didn't take any action. They're analyzing a million different business opportunities and they don't really know what they don't know. So they have the fear of the unknown. And if you just do these simple things to defeat poof, life becomes a lot easier. And I'm not just saying this just for franchise prospects, but I've noticed this mental roadblocks playing on over and over and over. And I think this is relevant for anyone, really. Like whether you're in business, you're starting a business, understand the 1,000-day principle, understand poof, and understand these kind of like voices which are playing around in your head, because I see it a lot. It's a very common thing. The good part is there's very easy ways to eliminate it. So hopefully this episode was helpful. Hopefully it gives you a little bit more insight, and I'll look forward to catching you on the next episode of the Freedom Formula podcast.